Well, hello everyone, and welcome to an introduction to Bitcoin webinar. Now, for a very long time we've done these live, but this one is actually a recording because increasingly people have been saying, well, I can't get to the webinar on this day, whatever, but I would like the information. So what we've done is we've just decided to record a version so that you can come and watch it at any time. Now, my name is Jason Deane, as you can probably work out from the screen there. And I've been in the industry for quite a long time. And before we get sort of into what we're going to be talking about today, which is, just the real basics of Bitcoin, I'm just going to give you a quick sort of overview who I am, just so you know that I'm sort of allowed to talk to you. I do actually know my subject a little bit. So I'm going to do sort of 60 seconds about me, and then we're going to kind of get into what we're going to cover off today. So as I say, I've been in Bitcoin now for quite a few years, and kind of what happened really was I stumbled into it. There's another whole story behind this, but we won't go into that now. But at some stage I had to kind of explain to my mum what it was I was now doing. And you can understand my mum at the time we had this conversation, she was, mid-70s, didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have the internet, and actually still doesn't have either of those things. Can't see the point of them, actually. So you can imagine trying to explain the concept of Bitcoin to her. And I don't think either of us came out of that conversation particularly well. So I'd already written a book, so I decided to write another one called How to Explain Bitcoin to Your Mum, which of course was designed with her in mind. So I wrote this book. I gave it to her to read. She did read it. She a little bit reluctantly, I'll have to say, but she did read the book. I think she's now got a basic understanding of Bitcoin, although I don't think she's going to be running any webinars anytime soon. But I published the book, it did quite well, and that kind of started along this road of sort of writing and talking to people about Bitcoin, particularly beginners, because in my own experience, and I'm sure it's true for most people's experience, when you discover Bitcoin, it is a little bit overwhelming. And actually, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things you don't understand. Certainly, I'm talking my experience here. And I just wanted someone to explain it to me like I was 5. And at the time, because this was going back a few years ago, that wasn't a very easy thing to find on the internet, because it was very, very technical usually. Or quite dismissive articles, so you couldn't actually really get to the bottom of what was actually going on. So it was, I thought, be quite handy to kind of do something along those lines, and that's what I started doing. And then eventually, because of the writing, I've become a top writer on sort of Bitcoin on various different platforms, including Medium, and that led me to then contribute to sort of mainstream media like Forbes and MSN, and sometimes pop up on the telebox and do stuff like that. So it's been a bit of a ride over the last couple of years, and it's been a lot of fun, to be honest with you. And talking of fun, I'm also the co-owner of the Bitcoin racing team, and I'm actually a driver as well this year. My car number is number 42, so I actually nicked someone else's car for that photo. But you can, if you're watching this in 2023, then you can follow the championship through the year. So I'm also a Bitcoin miner, but we're not going to get into that today because it's very technical at the back end. We don't need to know about any of that stuff to use Bitcoin, as we'll discover. So that's enough about me. I'm not going to do any more about that. So that's just to give you sort of an overview of sort of my background. And my own story is not atypical, as I say. Very confused by it, put it off for a long time, and made a bit of a mess of it. So really, I kind of understand what most of the questions are that people have when they first start, because I had all the same questions. So hopefully, if you're a real beginner with Bitcoin, this will help you. So this is what we're going to cover. This is a slightly different version I'm doing, as I say, for video, because normally we do this live. So I think the length's going to be somewhere around 30 to 35 minutes. And of course, the great thing about doing it like this is that you can start and stop it whenever you want to. But what we're going to cover off is I'm going to do what a Bitcoin is anyway first, right? Because if I start talking about all these other things, you'll still be sitting there thinking, like I would be, yeah, but what is it exactly? So we're going to just quickly cover that first, not in detail, just enough to get us through the presentation. We're going to talk about where it came from, how it came back, how do we get here, how do we get where we are now, where we're even, you and I having this conversation, very one-sided conversation, admittedly. What problems does Bitcoin solve? Obviously, it must solve some, otherwise we wouldn't, again, be having this conversation. What's going on with the price? We will talk just a little bit on that. I'm just going to just touch on it because people generally have asked me quite a lot, why is the price done this? Why is the price done that? So we're going to touch on it, but not really go into detail. We do talk about this in a little bit more in part 2, which is a kind of live version, which will run once a month that you can attend and ask any questions, but we'll come back to that at the end of this. It kind of links in very nicely to the next bit, which is what should I do next? We'll take you through some places where you can go and get some more information, and you can, at your leisure, learn at the rate you want to and to the depth that you want to. And of course, you can come and see the live webinar and ask any questions that you hadn't yet figured out for yourself, because we'll happily answer them. And of course, at the end of this, I'm also going to give you some free Bitcoin. Not a whole one, I should say. I'm going to give you £10 worth of Bitcoin, which you can claim today. You need to be over 18 to claim this, and resident in the UK will not work outside of the UK. Obviously, Bitcoin is global, but the budget I'm working with is UK, so it'll only work here in the UK. And you also need to be new to Bitcoin. So if you're already a Bitcoiner, you may not be able to claim this £10, but we'll come back to that at the end and I'll go through it in a little bit more detail. So let's get started. Let's just dive straight in. Let's ask this question. So what even is a Bitcoin? Right. Okay. Well, look, we're going to simplify it, right? So we're just going to say Bitcoin is money. Just leave it there for now. You'll see in a minute it's a very different type of money, but let's just say for now, Bitcoin is money, right? Now, obviously we already have money. We have, dollars, yens, pounds, whatever you can think of. We have it, so obviously it must do something else. We'll come back to that, but right now I just want you to tag it on the end of that list. So just think of pounds, euros, dollars, Bitcoin, just stick it in that list for now. However, it is a fair point to say, what exactly is money anyway? Because it's one of those things we don't sort of really think about, isn't it? It's just we kind of use it. And if you try and define it, it's actually not that easy to define. So economists like me, because my background is economics and particularly macroeconomics, and if you put us all in a room, we won't probably agree on anything, but there are certain definitions that we agree on, and most of us would agree that money has to have sort of 3 elements to it. And the first one of those is a medium of exchange. So it has to be something that you and I would accept in exchange for goods and services. It's a little bit simplified, but that's all we need for this point, really. So it's something we can exchange, usually something we can exchange quite easily. The other thing it needs to be is a unit of account. Now, what that means is we need to sort of be able to account for it, so we can kind of measure its value, and B, kind of measure its value as a way of measuring value, I suppose, between different goods and services. Right, let me try and explain that in a different way. If you go into a supermarket and you see a can of beans, I know it's a very British thing, so if you're watching outside of the UK, I'm sorry about that, but it's just a very British thing. You go and see a can of beans, and that can of beans has a price on it. It will say, £1.20 or £1.25 or whatever it is. Now, it doesn't say some money or a couple of quid or a few pence. It has an exact number that you are able to recognize and measure against something else. And that's kind of the element of a unit of account, I suppose, in the way that we use it on a day-to-day basis. So it needs to have that sort of measurement of value. The other thing is it needs to store its value, and in kind of 2 ways, really. It needs to physically store its value, so it can't be something that degrades. If you look through history, we've used things like seashells and beads and big rocks and all kinds of other crazy stuff, but they don't usually degrade. You wouldn't use pots of fresh cream, for example, because it would be useless after a week. The other thing is it's got to hold its value in terms of still being accepted in a few weeks or months or periods of time, because no one's going to accept it. And I don't mean that in a kind of physical degradation, I mean, in terms of, if you had beads, and this actually did happen in history, if you were using beads and a big bead producer came along and produced 1 billion beads, suddenly those beads don't really have value anymore. So there's that kind of angle to it as well. Now, there is a problem with our current monetary system, and this is what we're going to go through today, because actually the best way of explaining Bitcoin is to give some context to Bitcoin. So our monetary system has some problems at the moment, which is kind of why Bitcoin's come around. Something is very definitely broken. And you, even if you're not an economist or you don't work in finance or you don't know much about money, you probably have noticed this. You probably noticed there's a lot going on at the moment in terms of inflationary pressures and interest rates. I'm recording this in April 2023, so things may have changed. I don't suppose they're going to be much better when you're watching it, but something isn't right. You've probably heard something doesn't feel right in terms of buying food or whatever you're buying and trying to earn a living. Things are not what they were a few years ago. We're going to touch on that as well. And this is how we're going to do it. I talked about context, and context is absolutely key, because if I start talking about Bitcoin and you actually don't know how our existing financial system works, it's not really going to make much sense. And I sort of go through this part because even as an economist, I never really spent that much time looking at the evolution of money. I was much more interested in other aspects of economics. So it was only really when I spent the time looking at this, I thought, oh my God, there's a load of stuff I don't know here. And actually, if you speak to the average person, they don't really know how a monetary system works. And it's important because once you know it works, it kind of explains why Bitcoin's become important. So I'm going to do like several thousand years of human history here in just a couple of minutes. So just go with me because it will all make sense at the end. Just kind of come with me on the journey, right? So back in the day, before we had any sort of money, we had a barter system. And I've done a ridiculously oversimplified version of this here, but imagine you're a potato farmer, you only cultivate potatoes, and that's all you would have to eat unless you did a deal with your next door neighbor who's a cabbage farmer, for example, and you said, right, here's 10 potatoes, I have 5 cabbages, whatever you agree. Now that works as long as you both like cabbages and potatoes, but if one of you doesn't, you've got a problem, right? So you might have to go and do a deal with the carrot man or the parsnip lady or whatever first before you can come back to the cabbage man to do a deal there. So it does kind of rely on finding this chain of requirements, and that can get quite complicated. Plus you'd have to do it every single time you wanted to make a deal somewhere. So it's not a great system, but if it's all you've got, that's what you run with, right? I always think to myself, the people who weren't very good at negotiating probably didn't eat as well as the people who were, but I mean, who knows? This was a long time ago. Perhaps we'll never know. Now, this worked for however long in some form or another until we discovered gold. Now, humans have always loved gold. I mean, just go crazy for them. We've seen all sorts of things in history to do with gold. And what's not to like about it? I mean, it's kind of cool. It's very durable. It's hard to find. It looks cool. It's blingy. You can make stuff out of it. I mean, it's just got all the properties really of money. And pretty soon people started to realize, well, actually, I don't need to do a deal with, the parsnip lady or the carrot man or whatever, because actually I know that my next door neighbor would accept a little piece of gold because they know that everyone else would accept a piece of gold. So why don't we just start using bits of gold? And kind of that's really how it evolved. I mean, again, simplifying, but that's how it worked out. Now, there are problems with gold, obviously. You've got to keep it with you. There weren't any banks around at this time, and so that means people can relieve you of it, by force usually. Counterfeiting actually is a problem, or was a problem with gold back in the day. Still is actually, even today. You probably see headlines about this all the time. So it's not a perfect system, but it's not bad. And pretty soon we started to realize, actually, if we centralized the gold control, then we could issue the gold and sort of keep some control of that. We could do it in little shapes, usually circles, and we could put some stamps on it so people know it's authentic, and we could call them coins, and people could trade with these coins. And in fact, we didn't just use gold, we used silver and copper as well. And that's how that ran, again, for a very long time. And then there was a bit of a step change. Something happened in around the 9th century China. As far as we know, this is where this idea originated from. And it was something rather romantically called flying cash. Best way to describe it is to try and imagine it. So let's just again, just sort of come with me a second on this. Just go with me. You imagine you are a trader in the 9th century in China. You've just rocked up at a port. You've got all your goodies on your ship, your silks and your spices, whatever it is that you're trading. And you see your normal wholesaler who comes along, meets you, and he takes a look at the stock and he says, yep, I'll give you 10,000 gold pieces, which is the price you agreed on. But instead of sort of going off and coming back with bags of gold coins for you to count, he comes back with a piece of parchment. And of course, you'll probably be looking at this piece of parchment thinking, well, where's my gold? And he says, no, we've got a new system now. What we do, instead of actually giving you the gold, I give you this piece of parchment that kind of promises you the gold. And when you're ready, you go to this secure location in town, we call it a bank, and you can hand over this parchment and they'll give you gold. And it's a much better system because it means I don't have to bring the gold here and you don't have to get it to you ready and so on and so forth. Now, there must have been people who had very skeptical about this because people, if you've been used to dealing with gold for years and years and years, you just want the gold, right? Not this silly piece of parchment. Anyway, we did know it caught on eventually, and these pieces of parchment were just for merchants. They weren't for the average person to use, but pretty soon merchants realized, actually, if I didn't have one 10,000 gold piece thing and I had 10,000 ones or 1,010 ones or something like that, and I owed someone some money, I could just give them the parchment and they could pick up the gold whenever they wanted it. And so confidence in these things started to grow. And I'm sure you can see where this is going, right? Because pretty soon everyone realized, actually, you don't need to pick up the gold every time. You could just pass that parchment on and on and on and on. And whoever's got it can just go and pick up the gold. So the idea developed over years and years and decades, and eventually by sort of 16th, 17th century, most sort of modern or centralized democracies or civilizations had some kind of centralized gold system, again, broadly speaking, and they'd issue pieces of paper, which currency notes, that would allow people to pick up the gold as and when they wanted it. And so that brought us onto this kind of gold banknotes. That's kind of the next stage. And actually here in the UK, you can still see the remnants of that system. So this is a £5 note. It's a current £5 note. And of course, you've got the big letters, Bank of England, across the top. And written underneath, in actually very small letters, are the words, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £5. Now, back in the day, these were much bigger letters and much bigger words because they actually did mean something. Those words are there now purely and simply for sort of historical reasons. They don't really mean anything. And let me explain. Because up to roughly 1931, if you had a £5 note, which of course looked different to what they do now, you could go into the Bank of England, hand it over, and you would be given 5 gold sovereigns in return, because obviously each pound was backed by gold, broadly speaking. If you did that today, obviously you go into the bank, you're given a £5 note, and they just give you another £5 note or 5 £1 coins. You're not getting the gold, right? Because those days are gone. Now, something obviously happened between then and now. And broadly speaking, again, if there's any economists watching this, I am really simplifying this just to kind of make the point. But we basically ran on a gold system, like most countries in some form or another, up to about 1931. There was a kind of transitional period. And then at 1944, we had something called the Bretton Woods Agreement. And what happened then is we kind of collectively, that's most of the kind of advanced economies at the time, we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll peg our currency to the dollar, and the dollar will be backed by gold. So it was a kind of indirect sort of gold-backed system. And that system ran until 1971, in fact, August 1971, due to lots of sort of economic reasons. America basically defaulted on the deal. They basically said, nah, you're not having your gold. And this was sort of in response to a warship that the French had sent to New York to collect their gold, and Nixon said, "Yeah, you're not having it, and actually we're going to temporarily suspend this exchange." And of course, as we know, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program, right? So that program was never reinstated, and from that day on, all currencies became something called fiat currencies, which is a bit of a weird name, but it's from the Latin. It's kind of a decree. It means, let it be done, or I suppose in this context with money, it has value because we kind of say it has value, right? So it's not backed by gold anymore. And I find this amazing, actually, because I am actually older than our existing financial system. I was born more or less under a gold standard. All right. Probably most of you watching this were born under a fiat standard. Okay, so that's how young our entire financial system is in terms of human evolution. It's really young. So at the time I'm recording this is 51 and a bit years old, right? So that's a blink of an eye in terms of human existence. It's basically, you can class it really as an experiment. So anyway, let's come back to what we're talking about. So 1931, we stopped being gold backed. 1971, everybody stopped being gold backed at that point. And then we moved on to this fiat currency. Now, we've actually kind of moved beyond that since as well. Now, we still use fiat currency, but we now use it in a different format, don't we? I mean, we don't, generally speaking, use much cash. I can't even remember the last time I went to a cash bar. It is a long time ago. I'm talking years. But even things like, quite recently, if you went to a car park, you had to do a thing where you had to wander around the car park, have the right change and ask people, remember the days we used to talk to people, right? Or go to the corner shop and they wouldn't give you change because they'd wised up unless you bought something. Vending machines, even the smallest transactions we do with NFC on our phone or debit cards or credit cards, it's all electronic. So we've kind of moved away already from the old kind of cash system. And that ties in quite nicely with Bitcoin, of course, because Bitcoin is this digital kind of format system. So that brings you up to date. There you go, thousands and thousands of years of human history, and I covered it in 6 or 7 minutes there. So what does that mean? That's where we are now. So what exactly are the problems? If we move to this system, what problems have we created for ourselves? Well, we have actually got a few problems. In fact, there's quite a lot of problems, but I'm going to focus on 2 in particular. Now, the first one is quite simply covered by this little statement here. Now, if there's no gold standard, then you don't have to keep the amount of gold in the bank that you issue with the notes, right? So if you have 10 gold pieces in the bank and no one really comes to collect that gold, or they don't all the time, then you could probably issue 20 or notes for 20 or 30, 40, 50 or 100 or 1,000 pieces of gold. Now, if you come off that gold standard completely, if you just say all the notes on their own have value, which is where we are now, then it doesn't matter at all. You can actually just keep printing money. And that actually is exactly what we've been doing since 1971. And we started fairly cautiously, but in the last decade, particularly the last 5 years, we've gone absolutely crazy with this. And pretty much every country now just prints money when they need it. Now, you and I can't do this. We have to stick to our budgets. And if we run out of money, tough. You don't eat for a few days. Government runs out of money. They go, right, fire up the printing presses and we'll print another load of money. Now, to be honest, they don't physically print it. It's actually a different system that creates more money. But I love the image of that. So that was where, that created a problem, right? So but the thing is, if you go too far with this, you do end up with a problem, because again, it's basic economics. The more you produce of something, the less value it has if the demand doesn't match it. So you may remember Zimbabwe was probably the most famous of these kind of hyperinflationary situations, where the Bank of Zimbabwe massively overprinted the currency and ended up printing $100 trillion notes. I mean, just look at those zeros. I mean, it's crazy. Once you get to that crazy, it's impossible to keep up, and you have to, let the currency fail and reissue. In fact, they did reissue this more than once though, and just simply do it again. But it's not just Zimbabwe. We're seeing this all around the world right now. So in April 2023, when I'm recording this, we've got big problems in a lot of countries. And Venezuela is one that always comes up. And this picture here is a chap in Venezuela who is, as you can see, I don't see the picture very clearly, but in the front of him, he's got stacks of bolivars, and really big number, that years ago probably we were able to buy an entire house with, and now utterly worthless. But it's so worthless that it's actually just making it into purses and bags and little trinkets that tourists can buy for dollars, because he doesn't want his currency anymore. But into context for you, that's how much currency you needed. This was a year or so ago to buy that lump of cheese in Venezuela. I mean, how completely impractical is that, if nothing else? And of course, you just end up with money just being thrown in the streets because it's that worthless. No one's even going to bend down to pick it up. It's just paper at this stage. So we have abused it. That's happened a lot in the last 5 years, and that creates some devaluation. We see it as inflation. And of course, I'm sure you're aware of our current inflation numbers. Now, speaking of inflation, this gives you some idea. So I mentioned Venezuela there. Now, these obviously is April 2023, but when you're watching this, it might be different. But I bet there will be some names which will have the same levels of inflation. Now, at the time I'm recording this, in UK is 10.1%, or 10.4% actually. You can see here, I mean, that's considered high, but when you've got inflation rates of like 156, 190%, I mean, it's just impossible to work with that. That means prices are changing literally on an hourly basis. There you go. So UK inflation rate is 10.4%. And actually, the numbers that just come out are even more terrifying if you read them, because food inflation is currently 19%. Now, what that means is, unless you're earning 10% a year, you're getting a pay rise of 10% a year, you are going backwards in terms of your spending capability. Now, if you want to eat, a bit of a luxury that most of us like to do, you need a 20% pay rise, which most people aren't getting. Hence one of the problems that we've got in our financial system right now. But we have more than this, because we have another problem, and that is trust. Now, we humans are rubbish with money. I mean, we really are rubbish with money. And frankly, we shouldn't be allowed it. If you put the control of money, of a money supply, in the hands of a small group of people, historically, that's old white men, just, it's kind of a stereotypical thing, and it's stereotypical for a reason, because it's generally how it works out. They will abuse it. Now, we've done this all through history. I don't think there's been any exceptions ever of us abusing, I'm talking about us collectively as humans, abusing the money supply. But if you put money in the hands of a small group of people, it will be abused. Absolutely 100% guaranteed. Done it through history. We're doing it now. We're probably several thousand generations of evolution away from not doing it anymore. But that is one of the problems that we have as human beings. We will mess it up. Now, to give you some ideas of this, these are the kind of custodians of our monetary system, right? These are banks that we're supposed to be able to trust with our money, who are supposed to set the example for us in terms of how money is managed. Now, these are fines which have been paid by these banks, and this is as of a few months ago, actually. So I'm sure by now it's a lot harder, and by the time we watch this, probably even more than that. But Bank of America, just take them for a second, at the top there, $83 billion paid in penalties, and it's for money laundering, for rate fixing, LIBOR rate fixing, not taking the right precautions, turning a blind eye to sort of drug money. I mean, these are just crazy, crazy things which you couldn't imagine a bank doing, but this happens all the time. So there is a major issue with trust. And even in the last 20 years, we're now already talking $1/3 trillion in fines paid. And the banks keep paying the fines because they still make more money committing the crimes than they do have to pay out in fines. So it is crazy. It's been like this for years, decades, certainly. And unless something changes, this will never change. There's another element to this, of course. You probably know these two names. This is hot news at the time I'm recording this. Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank both failed. That's the second and the third consecutively largest bank failures in US history have just occurred. And this is again to do with bad management, bad risk management, not looking at the way the books were being done correctly. It's just a mess, and it was avoidable. But again, people were just taking big bonuses and not really focusing on what the issue was. So, trust is a problem, which leads us very nicely to Bitcoin, because of course we've now just been through the history of how we got to where we are. So we now know that. We now know what some of the big problems are. So it would be nice if we had a solution to that. And Bitcoin, I propose, is one of those, is kind of the front row, I suppose, as being the main solution going forward. Now, none of this is certain. We live actually in extraordinarily uncertain times in terms of the financial system. I've only just touched on it. Believe me, it's a lot worse than I'm saying. But Bitcoin is well positioned to be a good go-to for the next step. Because remember, money, as we've seen, is always the result of our latest technology. So let me explain why I think this is the case. And of course, as you realize by now, I'm certainly not alone. There are hundreds of millions of people now using Bitcoin around the world. And there are, those people are finding the benefits. So what are they and how does it all fit in? Well, let's just explain kind of what it is first of all in a little bit more detail. Right. It was launched in 2009 as an open source project. What does that mean? Well, most of the coding for this, because remember, this is just digital, which means it's software, was coded in 2008 and then launched very early 2009. Now, it was kind of launched into the community, if you like, by someone called Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a very cool name. But actually, we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto was. And the reality is we will probably never know who Satoshi Nakamoto was. We do know they were a movement, they were part of the cypherpunks movement, can't even say it properly, in the sort of late 90s, early noughties, we think, but certainly in the late noughties, they were very active. And what these guys do is they look at ways of like cybersecurity, or using ciphers really to stop the state kind of spying on them and us, everyone else. It's kind of counter-state operation, if you like. It's quite nerdy, and these guys have produced some amazing thinking over the years. And the idea of having money which was separated from state has been around for a long time, but of course it's very, very difficult to do. But Satoshi Nakamoto took some previous loans and he finally cracked it, released the code into the community, got a lot of people on board to help him, and then handed it over and said, right, I'm stepping back from the project now, over to you, never to be heard from again. And to this day, we have no clue really who Satoshi Nakamoto is. There's theories, but we don't know. Could be a man, could be a woman, could be a group, for all we know. Anyway, so the code was launched, the coins started to be produced, and the system worked for reasons that we'll touch on in a minute. The idea was that it was universal. It should be available to everyone, because money isn't available to everyone. Even now, as I'm speaking, there's something like 1.4 unbanked, 1.4 unbillion, I should say, important word, 1.4 billion unbanked people in the world. That's a massive number. And if you think about it, that's crazy in this day and age. This shouldn't happen, but it does, because banks won't deal with people who don't have much money. It's just not profitable for them. So, these people have to remain unbanked. Bitcoin solves that problem. Now, I should point out there is something about that date as well, which some of you may have picked up on. Most of the coding for this was done in 2008. Something else happened in 2008, which was kind of our first global financial crisis. We had something called the credit crunch. It was caused by bankers selling bad loans, really bad debts, I guess, sort of to each other and people, which basically ended up at the point where the music stopped playing and the whole system collapsed. And they were doing this for big bonuses, not because they were doing it for the people concerned. And as a result, people lost their businesses, lost their houses, some people lost their lives, but not a single banker was ever punished for this or went to prison. And that irritated a lot of people, particularly this movement. And particularly, it does appear, we can't say that for sure, but it does appear Satoshi Nakamoto, who's kind of doubled down his efforts to get Bitcoin running. Now, it is available to everyone. Anyone can use it anywhere in the world at any time. All you need is some kind of smart device and an internet connection, ideally, but you can actually do it without an internet connection as well. That's quite technical. We don't need to go into that, but it is possible. It is also decentralized. Now, what that means is, if you think about it, all our monetary systems are centralized. They're all controlled by a small group of people, usually a government agency or government, or in some cases a sovereign, but, that historically, but, they are a centralized system. Bitcoin is entirely the opposite. So it's owned by everyone and no one, so to speak. It's a bit of a cheesy expression, but it kind of works. Again, very technical here. We don't need to go into the technical stuff, but the reason is anyone can use it and anyone can participate in the management of Bitcoin. Let's just leave it at that for now. We don't need to go into any more detail. It is only digital, so ignore the physical sort of Bitcoin image that I put there. It's just for people like me to put in presentations. It does only exist digitally, but of course that's not really a problem for us because we're so used to dealing with stuff digitally these days anyway. Here's the really cool bit though, it's incorruptible by humans. So whereas we will destroy any monetary system we can control, we cannot physically do this with Bitcoin because of the way it's set up and the way it works. It cannot be controlled or destroyed by any individual or a company or a government or a country. It's that revolutionary. We've never had anything like this before. And to have a monetary system that no one can corrupt is new ground. It's a whole new rule book available to us now, and that's very, very exciting because, as I say, take us out of the equation, we can do great things. It is also a store of value. So Bitcoin, I mean, in my mind, this is the bit I really struggled with when I first started with Bitcoin because I couldn't understand. Well, I just copy your hard drive and get your Bitcoin, and like I do, like I might do with a song. We would never do that. I'm just saying that you could do with a song or a file or something like that, but it doesn't work like that. And again, there's very, very technical reasons why that works like that. But so that means any Bitcoin that you have that you send to me, for example, it will leave you and arrive with me, and that can be verified by everyone else. So that means you can create digital scarcity, which again hadn't really existed until this concept came along. So that means you can make it scarce, and actually by design, Bitcoin is the scarcest asset on the planet at 21 million coins. There will never be any more than 21 million coins. That is it. Now, gold's pretty scarce, but we are digging more of this out of the ground all the time. And actually, we don't know exactly how scarce gold is. So Bitcoin, by design, is even more scarce than gold, which is quite a thing. So let me just summarize these key points, because these are very, very important to understand the difference between the money we use on a day-to-day basis and the money that is now that we're talking about using here. So we've got our fiat currency on the left and we've got Bitcoin on the right. Let's just summarize fiat. It works because we have a collective belief of value, right? We all believe it has value. If I go into a coffee shop and buy a latte for £5, pretty much what they seem to cost these days anyway. If I hand over that £5 note, the chap or the woman on the other side will accept that £5 note, knowing that it has no other value or any other use. But they do know that everyone else believes it has value as well, so they can spend that fiver somewhere else. I know it's terrifying, but that's basically how it works. There is another argument saying, well, actually, it's backed by the government. Well, it kind of is backed by the government in a way, because the government issued it, right? So, but then you got to ask yourself the question, and it's quite hard to even ask the question: do you trust the government? Most people would say no to that for very good reason, because historically, again, it's not something we've done terribly well. So you've got another trust issue there. There is a further argument, particularly with America, when you can say, actually, it's backed by the military might of America, particularly when you start considering things like the petrodollar and stuff like that. So, the dollar is backed by the military. Okay, so let's kind of go with that argument for the sake of it for now. But what that means is you've got a currency which is backed by very emotive things, which is, a belief system, a trust system, and a fear system. And these are immeasurable kind of things, and there's lots of nuances, and these can be abused. So it's not a great system when you look at it from that perspective. Now, when you look at something like Bitcoin, very different. Okay. Oh yes, sorry, and of course it's controlled by centrally by those in power, usually for the benefit of those in power as well. Another historical thing that we've managed to do through our evolution. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is managed by mathematics. So there's no emotional side to this. As long as 2 + 2 = 4, Bitcoin will run and work. Simple as that. It's also, it gets a little bit complicated, but I'm just going to skip over this. It's also backed by the laws of physics, particularly the laws of thermodynamics, and that is the conversion of energy to value in this case. Again, this is all to do with the mining and the network that works behind it. We don't need to worry about that today, but what it does mean is that you can be certain, there is certainty in Bitcoin in terms of its production and its management, which there isn't in any other system we've ever had in history before. So, it's absolutes, and there's no central control, and it's equal for everyone. So wherever you are in the world, you could trade directly with someone else in the world, right? Just by using your Bitcoin addresses and sending Bitcoin to each other. You could send large amounts of money over borders. You try doing that through the banking system. It will take days. It costs a lot of money. There's a lot of paperwork. Bitcoin, you can do it instantly for almost nothing. So these are very, very different systems. And of course, no one can stop you with Bitcoin either. So next time you get someone say to you, oh, but Bitcoin's not backed by anything, which is one of the most common things people say to me, now you understand why people like myself find that comment quite funny, because actually what they're really talking about is the fiat system, which is generally speaking backed by nothing, whereas Bitcoin is backed by mathematics and thermodynamics and the laws of physics. So I know which one I'd rather have my money that way. Maybe I'm biased, but that's just me. So how does that all work in terms of the headlines of today? Well, here's why Bitcoin has become important and more relevant. These are the sort of headlines that we're seeing now. Again, this is April, so hopefully things have improved by the time you're viewing this, but I wouldn't bank on it, knowing what I know about how the monetary system is going to be working going forward. So we've got Forbes, global recession 98.1%, cost of living crisis. We're going through that right now in the UK, but I suspect elsewhere as well. Of course, if you're very wealthy, then we've seen that divide get bigger, rich get richer, poor get poorer. Again, this has happened a lot through history, but this is actually happening at an accelerated rate right now due to lots of different factors, which we haven't got time to go into here. Then there's things like, women have to walk, they're feeling a little bit more exposed because they can't afford taxis to get home. So they're walking home in dark times, and there's been some cases where this has been problematic. Inflation's at 10%. There are some things in mainstream media talking about maybe Bitcoin could be useful here. And this is a tweet. I don't actually know this chap, but I love this tweet here, and I'm going to read it out to you. And this was actually from last year. So he just tweeted out, 20 years ago, working as a server or waiter, I lived in a corner, 1-bedroom apartment downtown with amazing water views for $700 a month. A similar apartment now costs $3,600 a month, more than 5 times as much. Now, as a lawyer, age 47, I am unable to afford living in the same apartment I did at age 27 while waiting tables. Now, that is a beautiful summary for me. That really shows that we do have a problem with the value of our money and the value of our time being rewarded in that money. These two things have diverged a lot. And it is much harder now than it was certainly 20, 30, 40 years ago. And this here, I've just thrown this in because I thought this was really cool. That building there, if you don't know, is the Bank of England, and some very enterprising person came up one day and put a big projection on the front of the building all night. There's a Bitcoin logo, it says Bitcoin fixes this. And actually they did on other buildings as well. I just thought it was really cool. Right, so let's just recap before we move on to the next thing. So we've got our history. We've got what the problems are. We've got the solutions that Bitcoin can solve. And I do acknowledge I've covered the Bitcoin part, actually, not in massive detail, because really the context is important. The difference of Bitcoin to other currencies is kind of the key point to get. Learning it, the detail and how it works, we can do all that step by step. But you might be thinking at this stage, okay, well, it's great. Okay, I've got a little bit of an understanding, but I still don't really understand what's it look like, how do you use it, what am I supposed to do? All these sort of questions are probably in your head now. And actually, I personally think the easiest way to learn Bitcoin from here is to do Bitcoin. So what we do through Bitcoin Pioneers is, and with the guys kind of presenting this recording free of charge, is we actually give Bitcoin away free of charge, and you can claim some of that now. And we do that through our partner, Luno. And we partner with Luno because, as you'll see when you download the app, it is just beautifully simple to use. And for beginners, I think it's the best answer. But let's just go step by step. So if we're looking at the old system, our new system, right? So imagine our old financial system that we've used all our lives, and we've got this kind of crazy new digital Bitcoin system I've been talking about. We've got two worlds, right? So how do we bridge the gap between those two worlds? Well, it's a bit like if you remember the days you used to go on holiday and change money at the airport. Now, again, because we don't use cash, we don't do that so much now, but you would change your pounds for your euros, and euros for pounds when you come back. But we think of it as an exchange, but actually you're not. What you're doing is you're selling to the exchange your pounds, and you're buying back euros from them, and then just reversing the process. So we say exchange, but actually we're buying and selling. And what Luno does is it acts as that exchange between the kind of old world and new world. So pounds and Bitcoin, if you like, and then Bitcoin and pounds. And this can be linked back to your bank account, so you can draw money out into Bitcoin. Think of it as this other currency. So you can change money into Bitcoin, and you can change money out of Bitcoin. All right. And as I say, Luno is such a beautifully simple app to do that. It's really safe and secure. It's got this learning portal built in, which is also very cool. And it's easy to use. I mean, wow, it's really easy to use. So you can just set it up, download it. You do have to verify, which is, because obviously it follows all the banking rules. So you've got to do your passport or your driving license and a selfie. Usually takes a couple of minutes. Once you've verified, you're good to go. You can just move money in and out as you want to, as you would on any other banking app. It's pretty much the same in that respect. The difference is you can now have access to buying these other currencies, including Bitcoin. Now, I'm going to give you £10 worth today, which you can claim if, as I say, you're over 18, you're resident in the UK, and you haven't used Bitcoin before, or you haven't got a Luno wallet at least anyway. And then you can do this. And the way you do this is you download the app, and I really recommend that you take this if you can. You do the verification, again, just takes a couple of minutes. And once you've done that, you go to the rewards tab and you enter a code. And the code you enter is the one that's now on the screen there, which is BPJD. So that's Bravo, Papa, Juliet, Delta, Echo, Alpha, November, Echo. Remembered it. So all you got to do is type that in, and provided it's a new wallet and you do qualify under the terms I've said, it will add £10 to your wallet in Bitcoin. So you'll actually be a Bitcoiner. Then, of course, you'll probably be wondering what you're supposed to do with it. Well, I would say just hang on to it. It is actually locked anyway for 30 days deliberately, so that the idea is that you can then go and learn more about it, and then you can play with it. It is a gift. There's literally nothing else that you have to do. You don't have to put any money in. You don't have to subscribe to anything. It's just a gift because, we know from our own experience, it's much easier to learn this stuff if you actually have something in your hand and you can play with it. Just take it, hold it, enjoy it. Anyway, I do realize I've gone over a little bit more than I mentioned today. So this is the very last slide. I'm going to leave my contact details on the screen while I go through this. I'm going to leave the code on the screen as well. That code will remain active, so you can just use it as and when you want to. Don't panic about doing it now. So it will stay in the recording and it will stay live. So just make a note of it and you can use it. I've also put my contact details on the screen there. Honestly, I always say to people, look, don't be shy about getting in touch. Just drop me a line. Best ways is through email, jasondeane@msn.com, or through Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter and chatting all the time on there. So just you can DM me on there, or you can find me through any of these other links I've mentioned there. So by all means, please just get in touch, ask any question you think you might want to ask. But the two things I would strongly recommend that you do now. First thing is go to the Bitcoin Pioneers website. So that's bitcoinpioneers.com/learn about Bitcoin. Or you can just go to bitcoinpioneers.com. It just says learn about Bitcoin in the top right, which is probably an easy way of saying that. I've put the QR code there as well. That top QR code will take you straight to that site. So if you're watching it on the computer and you've got your phone, you can just QR code that now and it will take you straight there. Now, there's lots of resources. There's podcasts, there's YouTube videos. There's a whole selection of books which I've sorted into kind of beginners, intermediate, and advanced. There's websites you can go to. These have all been hand selected and designed really to take you from kind of real beginner right up to advanced if you want to go that crazy. But it is there, and you just take your time with it and just take your time to learn, because the most important thing now is to start getting some meat on the bones in terms of the basics, because it is a fascinating subject, and Bitcoin will definitely be a big part of what happens next. So understanding it is kind of a cool thing. So I recommend that you go there if you're not already there, because this video is on that site as well, so you might already be there. If so, just scroll down and have a look at the other bits of information. The other thing I really strongly suggest you do is you book yourself onto the next live webinar. Now, this is a much shorter webinar. We don't go, we very briefly touched on some of this stuff, but really we're talking about really basic investment strategies, thinking long term with Bitcoin, how you can maximize your Bitcoin. It's deliberately short because there is a big section at the end for questions and answers, the AMA, Ask Me Anything. And we found that this is really useful, because now that you've been here, you've got some basics, might have still a few questions. You can answer some of that as you go through all the materials that are on the website. But then if you're like me, once I'm on a subject, I just want to know what this is, what that means. And sometimes it's just easy to ask a person. So we run this webinar once a month. If you scan that QR code there, or just use that link on the screen, I think it's probably underneath this little box as well, so you can click on it directly. If you want to attend, just click on either of those links and just register and come along and ask whatever question you like. As long as it's kind of Bitcoin related, we will be able to answer it for you. And I especially encourage what you might consider the daft questions, because they're usually the ones everyone wants to ask and wait for someone else to ask. So please come along. Literally any question that you can't find the answer or you're just not sure about, just ask him. And you don't have to come on the screen. You can do it anonymously as well. If you just prefer, just type the question, you can do that as well. So it'll be great to see you there and do that. Right, as I say, I have gone over a little bit more than I thought, but I hope you found it useful. So I'm going to stop this video here. But as I say, get in touch anytime you want to get in touch, and we will and we can have a chat and claim your £10. And I hope this was useful for you. Good luck on your Bitcoin journey, and maybe we'll see you at an event sometime in the future. Anyway, thanks very much. Thanks for listening. And see you guys around.